Is the fighting around Klishchiivka heating up? Maybe even so much so that Russia is pulling its forces from elsewhere on the front line to prevent disaster? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. It's September 28th, 2023. This is your daily Ukraine update. Let's get into it. Okay, first taking a look at the control map. Let's get me in the right spot. Taking a look at the control map, there's only minor frontline updates today. So the couple that we have here, the first is Russian forces. It's slightly repositioning, slightly pulling back from these fields to the south of Verbova, likely part of Ukrainian efforts to try to occupy some of the heights surrounding the town prior to making a push into it. I know there was discussion earlier this week about Verbova and Ukraine being ready to push, but it seems like maybe they did some reconnaissance, maybe some probing attacks, and realized that no, they have to occupy better support by fire positions before pushing into the town itself. As a general rule, the hills usually are outside of the town, and a town is going to be built often, especially agricultural towns like this. They're often built along a river or in a valley. This is, a classic agrarian region move is to build your roadways through these low valleys. And so when you're fighting in a low piece of terrain, it's absolutely essential that you dominate the heights surrounding it. So I think that's what we're seeing here from Ukraine. The only other change that's worth noting, and even that sort of barely so, is it looks like Russian forces withdrawing further, or the line of Russian control passing entirely outside of this windbreak near Andriivka, which is bad news for Russia, right? They really need to hold this windbreak. The fact that so much of this area is now listed as contested is actually a substantial problem for Russian forces who need to use terrain wherever they can to maintain their defensive posture. When we see these increasingly pressed or harried withdrawals, it's a sign that maybe Russian forces don't have the morale or the leadership or the coordination necessary to stabilize this situation. So the only question is, does it have the resources, given that there's the fighting in Klishchiivka has been very, very heavy, as has the fighting in Verbova. And in fact, if you're interested in seeing the uncensored combat footage from Klishchiivka, I'm going to be doing an analysis of that today over on Combat Vet News. Combat Vet News is my equivalent to Patreon. Patreon and YouTube have said, hey, you can't put combat footage of any kind on here. And so Combat Vet News is where I do my analysis of all the combat footage. It's also the best way to support the channel. Specialist tier is going to get you access to the members only content. But if you want to become an even more elite supporter, you can check out the lieutenant tier that gets you the shout out at the end of the videos, or even the colonel tier, who I thank exclusively with their own slide at the end of the videos. But any one of these tiers is going to get you access to the members only content. I can't even show you the thumbnails. That's how strict YouTube has become about demonetization. But it's the best way to get that POV, that GoPro footage of the frontline operations, to know how things are really going. It's usually the first source we can get to tell how things are going for Ukrainian forces. So check us out at combatvetnews.com. Link is in the description. And let's take a look over at X, right? This is, again, bear in mind the rumor mill, right? But this is supposedly a tweet from 17 hours ago about Klishchiivka, reporting that Ukrainian forces are advancing along this windbreak to the north, as well as just to the south of Andriivka, indicating again that Russian forces are being pushed further and further back from this control line along the this railway with windbreaks. And the danger here, again, is that Russian forces need time to stabilize a fighting position. And they had so much time to build this up, but it seems like somebody's ego took charge and insisted on fighting tooth and nail for Klishchiivka, including supposedly a number of costly counterattacks that obviously didn't really change control of the town. And now, instead of digging in, deploying minefields, and making life difficult, the Russian forces are sort of in a low-grade retreat, or at least are unable to establish solid defensive positions that can resist Ukrainian advances. It's a real problem for Russia, but a good situation for Ukraine. And there's been a lot of rumors that in order to stabilize this situation, Russia has had to pull more troops from other frontline locations to shore things up. What we may see, if this is true, areas in the north, you may start to see Russian troops. You may start to see Ukrainian advances there. So, just something again to think about. And looking at the news, right, there's not a ton of news, period, full stop. The reason I bring this up, and you could see it's kind of confirmed here by the fact that there's just very, very little updates, just 26 combat engagements by Russia, but you see they're not reporting artillery strikes, just the one here, not reporting Ukrainian advances. So it may be that the front line is more quiet, but it may also, I think more likely, is that this reflects OPSEC by both sides. Both sides don't want to show their cards. They have plans in place, and neither side is willing to disclose what exactly their plans are. And you can see the situation near Verbova remains unclear, according to the Institute for the Study of War. And they point out that Russian mill bloggers are reporting less detail on Russian activity along the Verbova front line. They're definitely reluctant to present bad news or Russian failures. And the only discussion of problems in the area is on the fringes of the Russian information space. And this, I think, is reflective of the fact that the Russian forces, the Russian government really wants to get a tighter control of their information space, especially around their failures. It is not politically a good look for the Kremlin to see this level of military disaster. And they obviously have cracked down on mill bloggers who say too much bad news or are too critical. And I think that trend is only going to exacerbate as Russia proves itself unable to make meaningful advances. Right. It sounds like, again, that's really all I had for you today. Thank you to all our Colonel tier members. I really couldn't do this without you guys. Thank you to our Lieutenant tier members. And of course, thank you to all of our members of combatvetnews.com. And I'll see you over there today for today's combat footage breakdown. Cheers.